Thanks so much, Jasmine. I'm going to share my screen so we can get started. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're excited to have you here. And for those of you that have served, thank you so much for your service and your participation. This session is really a practical guide for navigating corporate contracting and leveraging the assets that you've gained through service. It's about understanding and respecting veterans' experiences and valuing what you bring to the table as business owners. So it's how do we leverage that for success as you navigate corporate contracting and through a citizen's lens specifically. I'm Adriana Flex. As Jasmine said, I head up our supplier diversity initiative at Citizens. Prior to Citizens, I was the founder of a diversity, equity, and inclusion consulting business. So I was an entrepreneur as well, learning the ins and outs of corporate contracting, honing my pitch, and working to meet with buyers as well. So I have that experience in my background. Chris?
Good afternoon, folks. Chris Dalton. Like Adriana, I kind of walked out of college, spent a few years as a high school teacher, and then joined the Marine Corps. Less stress and better pay. And I spent about 26 and a half years in the supply and logistics field, both at the tactical, technical, the stuff level, and on the planning side. And then the last just shy of 6 years, I've been with Citizens since I retired in strategic sourcing.
Thanks, Chris. So I want to talk briefly about One Citizens. One Citizens is our lens through which we connect customers, vendors, through all different aspects and areas of Citizens. We bring expertise in both helping you navigate contracting, but also thriving as a business. So I want to share a link, and I will drop it in the chat during the Q&A, but to our small business banking website. We really work with businesses for every aspect of their needs in terms of banking. So how do you develop and grow? How do you scale? How do you access capital? On that website, you'll also find some great learning resources for business owners. So we kind of are thinking about you all and your businesses, both as potential vendors and also potential customers through this One Citizens lens. So today in our session, we're going to talk about both our procurement process at Citizens and our supplier diversity initiative, as well as how you translate your military skills into business advantage. We'll talk a little bit about navigating corporate culture and really how do you overcome challenges that may unfold for you. And ultimately, how do you turn your experience and service into success in a corporate setting? This session is really about expanding access to qualified suppliers to our citizens' opportunities and providing some transparency in how our system works. So I'll share a little about our supplier diversity initiative. At Citizens, we promote the inclusion of diverse suppliers in our supply chain. We encourage the inclusion of qualified diverse vendors, including veteran-owned businesses, to help drive innovation, cost reduction, and support our growth at Citizens. This is what we believe and what we champion. So why does that matter at Citizens? Why is it important for us to have a diverse supply chain? We believe we are most successful when our supply chain mirrors our customer base. It's not only good business, but it's an important part of our culture at Citizens. We also look to diverse vendors to bring various types of innovation. You have specific experiences, both from past careers and also business expertise. We look for diverse pools of talent in terms of what vendors bring to the table in terms of goods and services. So it's really a business strategy for us. So let's talk a little about our procurement process. This is a kind of a brief look. First, we look to identify qualified vendors, and there's a qualification process. We start by looking for vendors for our particular needs, evaluating those vendors, and determining which businesses are qualified to provide the goods and services that we need. This qualification process and this identification process may look different for different vendors, right? So you may find that you're a fit in this part of the process, and a little further down, it may be not a fit. And so it's important to understand kind of the first, second, and third of our process. Then I should say as well, in terms of the qualification, when you meet a supplier diversity professional, let's say I'm the entryway for you into Citizens, what I'm looking for and evaluating is different than what Chris, who's in sourcing, may be looking for and evaluating. And then the same thing with the business line. So I may first look to see, have you worked with other banking and financial institutions? Is your business the size and scale that can meet our needs? For example, Chris, knowing his commodity, may be looking into more depth about your capabilities. And then, of course, when you meet with a business line, the person who or the group who will be utilizing your services, their level of qualification or what their needs are may be, again, more in depth. So fit and qualification change in terms of what we're looking for when you speak to a supplier diversity professional versus a sourcing professional versus a business line. Then there's a bidding and selection process. So once we determine if the business is qualified, you're invited to an RFP or an RFX process. There's a standard set of evaluation where all vendors who've been invited are evaluated based on that. And then selection happens from there. After that, once you're in and you've received the contract or you've secured the contract, there's a contract management process, right? So not only are we, making sure that our terms, we're in agreement on our terms and how things are delivered and what the deliverables are, but we also review for compliance and performance throughout the partnership. So when I talk about fit, these are certain things that we think about. Is the vendor a fit for our needs? I want to talk a little bit about that. Do you offer the products and services at baseline? This is what we're looking for. This is what you do. Do you provide a particular innovation or a niche? This may give you a cutting edge in the process. I had an example where we were looking for a vendor to decommission and destroy some of our hardware products. A particular vendor happened to be a diverse vendor, offered an evaluation of that process through a sustainability lens, right? So how are the decommissioned computers and other devices being handled, and what does that look like in terms of how in alignment is it with citizen sustainability goals? This was a niche that vendor that was smaller than a competitor, it really made them rise to the top. So you may not be as big in terms of your business as a competitor, but if you offer a particular innovation, something that Citizens or another corporation is looking for or didn't even know was an innovation in the particular offering, that may also create a greater fit or advantage for you in the process. What is your experience or reputation? Are you working within banking and financial services? If you're not working within banking and financial services, it's also helpful when we're in this sort of qualification process, vetting your capabilities, to highlight or illuminate other industries you're working in that are highly regulated, right? So that also may show Citizens or another corporate entity that there is fit. You're able to work within the constraints and confines of a highly regulated industry. Scale, size, and capacity. Sometimes what we need is a large company to take on a large contract. That may not be the case for everything, right? We go back to niche. If we're looking for a consultant that has a particular expertise, size and scale is not critical there, right? But a large contract to, build multiple branches, right? We need to know that the company has the size, scale, and capability and capacity to take on the work. And then last is cost, right? Is there cost savings by working with a particular company? And that may be what's a big determining factor to fit. But what we know at Citizens and what many corporations will say is cost is not the only factor. It's easy to say, well, work with us. We're the most cost competitive. However, companies will pay more for something that they see that is valuable. So cost is only one part of what we determine to be fit. Chris, do you have anything more to add to this? I don't want to miss out on your expertise for this one.
No, it's wonderful and very cogent. One, I guess, an area where I might amplify uh, the innovation or niche and related to cost is a lot of what we look at on the strategic sourcing side is the value proposition. So to Adriana's point, you may not be the low price leader, but when we look at the other industries you've been aligned with, your previous experience and sometimes we'll ask, hey, can we reach out to those other clients? We're trying to look and see what is the best value proposition so that whomever we contract with for a longer term is a better overall value, as I would imagine this group probably can appreciate. You want it cheap, you want it bad, you'll get it both. And then it means we have to go back out and rebid again, and we have to look for a new supplier. And that's significant cost in time, human capital, and effort. So that's as much of what we look at behind the scenes when we're working with potential vendors, regardless of their background. It's to see how well they holistically fit into what we're trying to accomplish.
Thanks, Chris. Absolutely. So at Citizens, we buy in what is generally five broad categories. So I want to give you insight into those. And banking and financial institutions will have this as pretty common across the board. We buy in property and real estate operations, and you can see kind of the list of various goods and services we will buy here. And of course, this recording will be put on the NaVOBA YouTube, so you can come back to this and look at all the various things we buy and determine alignment with what you offer. But one of our verticals is also business interaction. So this is how are we interacting with customers? How are we interacting internally to create a positive experience? So that might be, user design, marketing, communications, things like that, even mail service. IT infrastructure, right? We know there's a lot of technology that has to be behind the scenes to do what we do really effectively and serve our customers. And then core banking. So all of the things that make a bank kind of function and compete within the market. So whether that's understanding risk, compliance, fraud, payments, and then there's HR, legal, and consulting services. So we have to recruit talent. We have to bring in subject matter experts in terms of consulting. We need, legal support beyond our internal legal departments. These are kind of the key areas that we buy in. It's important to us to have a strong mix of vendors, whether they be large, medium, and small, onshore, nearshore, offshore. We look at our mix of vendors and through one lens that is also about supply chain disruption, right? So consider what advantage you may have by if you are an onshore company versus an offshore company and we have a supply chain disruption, right? So in each of these categories, there's different priorities for what we're looking for, but overall, we look for a strong vendor mix and both large and small. And we also work with, large publicly traded companies as well as small to large privately owned vendors like your businesses as well. So Chris is going to talk a little bit about this mindset shift to go from a public facing role or public service role in military or even government contracting to then a corporate structure.
Thank you, Adriana. And I think the first key difference in what I experienced as I retired and moved from the public sector to the private is the impact of relationships on identifying potential, in this case, potential clients and or potential vendors. Transition, you relate that to like on the military side where it's typically an RFQ is going to go out and vendors are going to try to meet as close to 100% of the qualifications they can to submit a bid. And then it's going to go through a lot of machinations, but it's going to be relatively impersonal. There may be someone on the business development side, but at the end of the day, it's going to be a lot of mechanics to meet the requirements of the government contract. On this side, what may seem a little bit say oxymoronic, having a relationship with a vendor and understanding who they are beyond the the social media label is critical, because part of what we're we're, we're creating a relationship, and it's going to last 1 or more years. And so knowing who we are working with is critical to finding a good fit. And sometimes that fit is going to be financial, and other times it's this company or this organization has the skills. They may not be the largest player, but they have the skills and they have the personality, if you will, and the intimacy of who the group is, that we know we're going to get their best effort. Nothing perfect, but we know they're going to get their best effort. And so that builds the trust and that confidence to where we are able to work with those potential vendors, and then it kind of forge that relationship. And so that's going to be key. And part of where the military background does come into play is that all the folks on this call, you're very adaptable and flexible. You've dealt with circumstances as they are, not necessarily as you want them to be. And so it's introducing yourselves in a genuine manner, being who you are, portraying what your company does, and letting us see the authenticity up front. And then we go from there. And as you'll see there, matchmaking and networking events, it may feel like, pardon the expression, throwing a lot of spaghetti against the wall, but making those connections, and when folks attach a name and a face to an event, or make a LinkedIn connection and have slow burning conversations, those mature over time. And that, in a few cases, is how I have worked with veteran-owned businesses that have become potential vendors for us. So, and I think that nails it in terms like the VBE opportunities. On the closed RFP process, and I think to echo Adriana's point, that when you're able to get into, and she'll talk about supplier IO and become known, we don't publicly solicit RFPs. Easy example, we're not going to build an aircraft carrier and just put it out there and ask people to come and bid on building the ship. We are going to work to identify viable candidates that for a need we have, and our needs change all the time. In a 365-day year, you might have 210 days where we're going to have a new requirement pop up. So our RFP process is going to be demand driven from the business line, as opposed to at the government level, this thing needs to be built or this building needs to be constructed, and then everybody bid, and then they start to work down from there. So that's part of where becoming your capability statement to the supplier diversity, and at least using Adriana as an entry point to be known, is significant.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, and just to punctuate what Chris said is, when you work within the government sector, if you're versus within a corporate sector, government tends to have open RFPs. You can find them, and your challenge then is make the case, submit the RFP, show your results and why you're a good bet in terms of being competitive for that. With corporate, the relationship matters so much beforehand because our RFPs are closed. So you're not going to just Google or go to the Citizens website and find all the opportunities. You've got to find the entry points, which is the important shift. And those entry points require relationships. So for those on this call, or who watch it later, you can submit your capability statement directly to me at the supplier diversity email address at Citizens. That's not something that is even published per se. That is for those on this call and those with the entry point through NaVOBA. Again, relationship. Build a relationship with NaVOBA, find opportunity. What my commitment to you all is, I will look at your capability statement, and if I see fit or qualification, I will share that with someone in sourcing, someone like Chris in his role. One of my jobs is to make sure that those in sourcing have a good, strong lay of the land of qualified vendors in their commodity. So I can be that conduit, but there's one of me, and there's thousands and thousands of you all. So it's not every single capability statement that gets passed on. Sometimes too, when I see a capability statement or a website come through from a vendor, I can also provide some feedback. So you may get a response from me that says, hey, you may want to reframe this. You may want to highlight this. Any feedback you get from one of the entry points of a relationship, whether it would be someone like me or someone in sourcing who you meet, take that to heart, because those are the people that help shape the relationships, that help create the entry points for you into a corporate opportunity. The next mindset shift in terms of a public process versus a closed or private process. Another thing that happens within corporations is we search for you, right? So somebody in my role or somebody in Chris's role, we have to search for diverse vendors all the time for an emerging need if we don't have the relationship with somebody who is able to meet that need just yet. And so becoming searchable is very important. So identify the corporate buyers or corporate customers that you're targeting and determine what they use for their diverse vendor search database. So if they have supplier diversity, they are searching within a database to identify diverse vendors. Citizens uses Supplier IO. You can register in Supplier IO. Any diverse vendor can do so, or small business as well. Register in Supplier IO and make a profile so that when I'm searching for a particular need or Chris is searching for a particular need, not only are you searchable, but you have a robust profile that sort of starts to do the selling for you. It's hard to believe that, and I hear this from vendors all the time when I reach out to them, that someone from within a corporate entity is searching for you and then will reach out, that you are findable through what's called organic search. But it is true, we do look. And at Citizens, our requirement is not that we have a diverse vendor in every opportunity. It is rather that we've done our due diligence to research diverse vendors for each opportunity. That's where, what we require at Citizens is, did we look in all of these key areas to find qualified vendors? And one of those is to find diverse vendors. So for Supplier IO, you may go on there and also see that there is a profile for your company that exists that you did not put up. How does that happen? We work with Supplier IO every quarter to validate our vendors to identify which ones are diverse. If there's a new vendor in that mix that we've worked with that does not have a profile, Supplier IO creates a profile with the information available. So you may go look for a profile for your business and see it there, but it not be complete. You then have to claim that profile to add to it and make it more robust. Again, so that when we search for you, there's some strong information showing your capabilities, showing your contact information, and you becoming searchable as a business also is really valuable and important, because it's, if you think of an open RFP process, there isn't as much of a need for a government entity to do that search for a qualified vendor because you are finding all of the opportunities. The converse is true for corporate. We need to search for you and you need to build relationships with us. So these are kind of two steps you can take to make that shift to be more able to navigate just that identification process for corporate opportunities. So Chris is going to talk a little bit about the skills and attributes that military service brings that can bring that business advantage you can highlight to have an advantage in a corporate contracting opportunity.
Thank you, Adriana. None of these should be a surprise to anybody in the audience, as you've lived in military service or family members that have been in. They all apply as directly to engaging in the private sector as on the military side. And certainly it begins with leadership. You have the skills from the time when you were board ship in a squadron with a unit, wherever it might be, where you had to deal with, as I said, the conditions as they are, and you had to develop or execute the leadership skills to be successful. And that's every bit what you're doing today is by taking this first step, is you're demonstrating the leadership by bringing your company to this table and helping us to know that you are out there. And part of that's going to be, when we can afford that relationship, what is your team like? What is your business model? And those types of things. And there's kind of an unspoken expectation that a veteran-owned business is already going to have a strong leadership contingent with it. So you're already going to have that working for you. And so that expectation is going to be there. The discipline and reliability, I think, are going to almost go without mention, is that, again, because of your backgrounds and the fact that you have your own businesses, you've taken that step, that you have that discipline. We can trust that what you say you can do, you will. And that's part of the discipline and the reliability as we forge that relationship. We work through the contracting piece. So less of a concern that you may be a fly-by-night, if you will, kind of organization. Strategic thinking is an interesting one because on the military side, that can really be rank, field, time and service dependent. Just to be quite honest, we know entry level folks are going to just do the job, and the more senior you become, the more that holistic strategic thinking. But citizens especially is really taking on, as we call it, reimagine the bank, a very strategic approach to what we do, how we do it, and how we can more effectively do it, if you will, across all the lines of business, all the verticals. And so knowing that you come in with that tool in the belt of the ability to assess the environment and to look beyond citizens has a problem today. I'm going to try to solve it as, hey, citizens, here's how we can not only help you with today, but here's what we, Company X, here's what we're thinking down the road. Here's what we're seeing in the industry. Here's where we think we can align with you both intellectually as well as functionally, that kind of thing. Teamwork and collaboration, I think that also goes without saying, is that your skills developed in uniform to work as part of a team greater than yourself will come to the front. And quite honestly, without exception, every veteran business that I have had the pleasure of interviewing, whether it's like the Operation Matchmaking event or in other venues, that just always comes out. That's natural, that collaborative mindset in that we're working for a common goal here. And so, you already having those from your time in uniform is yet another great benefit. Integrity and ethics, I'm not going to say anything on that. That's already assumed, and that's part of why we like to look at veteran-owned businesses. That's a flat-out assumption, is that you're going to have that and you're going to bring that to the table. Operational efficiency can be kind of interesting. A lot of that gets into the conversation as we discuss our needs in your business model and how well do you do that thing. And kind of to tie back into one of the earlier slides when I talked about innovation versus niche, a risk can be kind of unlike in the government contracting side. We, Company X, want to be all things to all people all the time so we can get as many opportunities as possible. Okay, we know that's not efficient. Do you come to the table demonstrating excellence in what you do and delivering that high quality result? We are really good at this function. We're not going to do everything. We are really good at this. We have partnered with these companies, and these are the results from it. That type of thing, to where you're demonstrating that we're coming to you, citizens, with a business model that we have tested, we know is good, and we are not going to waste your money, if you will, on a bunch of peripherals on there. But all these tie back into your time in uniform when every day you're having to cycle through these various skills, whether it's getting ready for a deployment, whether it's going out into the field, or just doing a barracks inspection. I mean, all of these come into play throughout your career, and they're paramount as you transition to the corporate sector and work as a veteran-owned business, trying to seek opportunities with companies such as us.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, and I'll punctuate. It's helpful to reinforce, highlight some of these skills, some of these strengths in your pitch. When you have the opportunity to pitch to me or to Chris or to a business line, these are competitive differentiators that become inbuilt through service that corporations are looking for, that prove out to business success and strong partnerships. So definitely highlighting these. Chris is also going to talk about some challenges for veteran-owned businesses that may come up.
I think to touch on the first one, in terms of limited corporate networks, because depending on the type of post-military service business you want to engage in, you may not have had the opportunity to develop the strong networks. And I'll compare that to from the cradle on up civilian organization that has had years, decades of building their business model, doing networking events, and becoming known inside the walls. A challenge for a veteran entrepreneur can be taking off the uniform on day one, and on day two, now you put on your corporate attire, and now it's okay. How do I build my network to become known? And that can be a challenge just because you spent life in kind of a bubble in military service. So now in this world, it's kind of the Wild West. It's how much initiative do you have, and are you willing to take to build those networks, which ties back into the networking events, into these types of opportunities, finding folks on whether it's LinkedIn or Glassdoor, or going to a company and looking for veterans and saying, is it possible to have a cup of coffee? I'd like to find out about you, and just to let you know who we are. And that's the extent of it, is just make yourselves known, because I don't know what I don't know until I meet up with you. Sales skills, where I think our backgrounds in the uniform can at times be somewhat of a challenge, is that generally speaking, and I know it's not all people all the time in every situation, but generally speaking, when we conducted a briefing or had to communicate an order, there was a very scripted uh, sequence of events. And so it was very mechanical. And the sales skills on the corporate side tend to be a lot softer, a lot more conversational, informal. Have a cup of coffee and have those conversations to just kind of get to know each other. It could be a slow burn. It's not, I'm gonna have a meeting with Adriana at 2 o'clock, and by 2:35 the meeting is over. I have shared 15 slides of data, and we move on. So that's where it's transitioning from kind of a structured military sequence of events mindset to how do I become familiar to them and they become familiar to me. That communication. And part of that too is also the language. Is and I'll tell you flat out, early in my career with Citizens, I had to catch myself, and a few times I was corrected on using military jargon, and nothing inappropriate, but just buzzwords and acronyms that were so second nature to me. But it didn't resonate on the private sector side. So part of that, learning the new language, if you will. Then the unfamiliarity with the procurement policies, I think, as Adriana very eloquently highlighted earlier in the presentation, we are not like going for a government contract. It's in some ways less rigid, hence more squishy. And the problem with that is, once you get to, let's say you get to an RFP, okay, then it's a matter of going through the process of what are the requirements we're looking for, and be able to respond to those, and some of the legal and cyber and some of the other categories that we're going to ask you about in there. And then it might flat out be conduct a short proposal to the business line team. That might lead to 1 or 2 rounds, and then we're going to selection. And so, unlike a government contract that potentially can take months or years, these can happen in weeks. And so the velocity of the policies and the procurement procedure tends to be a little bit quicker. But at the same time, because Citizens is a financial services company, we're pretty darn highly regulated. Once we are with an organization, start working through the master agreement and the statement of work, that can take some time, because then there are a lot of tentacles that are going to be shot out there in terms of making sure that who we are agreeing with, you can meet our requirements. So it's kind of quicker on the front end, can be longer on the back end.
Yeah, absolutely. I think additionally, these challenges are actually common and solvable. When you're in them, and I can speak as an entrepreneur myself, not as a veteran, but as an entrepreneur learning the corporate contracting process, it can be very overwhelming because you're dealing with all of these things at the same time, or you may be. But these are solvable problems or challenges, and they don't speak to your capabilities as a partner, as a vendor, as a business. They may just speak to your experience and exposure to these things. So we'll talk a little bit, not in the next slide, but the next, about how do we combat some of these challenges? What are how do we navigate these things effectively so that we either build new skills and new muscle, or are able to kind of see the forest for the trees, see and demystify some of the unspoken and hidden rules. Speaking of the hidden rules, I'll talk a little about the hidden rules of the corporate environment and some expectations within corporate. So as Chris described, the culture is different, right? Corporate norms are different than military norms, or even when you're working with government in a government contracting setting. Corporate environments have more implied expectations, and communication styles can be more informal, and that will influence workplace behavior and relationships, right? If we're talking about relationships are first most important and then results, right? We have to navigate the relationship to even then prove our results or to make the case that you would be a strong partner or vendor for selection. Understanding these hidden rules can build stronger relationships, can help avoid miscommunications and misalignment, and really help you navigate kind of corporate structure and corporate culture more effectively. How do we look through this or see through this or navigate? It can be valuable if you use some of your skills like being highly attuned, that can be honed in service, being highly attuned to differences or changes in the environment. That's a skill that a lot of folks in military build. If you use that same skill within a corporate setting and say, how can I be highly attuned to the keys and the cues of corporate culture? Maybe it's how people dress. Maybe it's how people address each other. It could be how is somebody addressing you in an email. If you identify those things and start to adapt when you're working with a particular corporate customer or even just building the relationship, it creates a stronger sense of fit. It can create a stronger sense that the culture of your company and of working with you will fit smoothly and effectively with that corporate customer. We already discussed relationships really do drive contracts, right? So this is, demystifying the hidden rules. Corporate buyers, we value trust and rapport building, right? So building those relationships with procurement folks or sourcing or supplier diversity folks can really be that key. Professionalism, we put in quotes. This is important. It matters, but it means something different in different contexts, right? Corporate clients may use varying levels of formality in our communication. You may be used to communicating with dear sir or ma'am, right? For example, but if you're talking to a customer that is a tech company in Silicon Valley, everybody wears jeans to work. Sometimes people wear shorts. That might be too formal. So it may seem professional, but it may still not feel like fit. And the same thing too, banking has a different look and level of what professionalism looks like than retail, right? Than if you're pitching to Target versus you're pitching to Citizens. So professionalism means something different in different contexts. Communication needs to be strategic. So tailoring your messaging to different audiences, not just industry, right? I said Citizens versus retail versus CVS versus whether it's healthcare or a retail environment. Tailoring your message as well to who within the company you're speaking to. Your message may be different to supplier diversity as an entry point versus sourcing. And I always give this example when I'm at large conferences and I meet lots and lots of vendors, and they'll start off their pitch. I meet a technology vendor and they start off their pitch and they're going a mile a minute. And I say, hold on, you lost me at AWS full stack integration, because someone in supplier diversity usually knows an inch deep and a mile wide of what that company buys. Chris is an expert in his category. So your pitch to me needs to be strategic. Your pitch to Chris needs to be strategic. It's just a different strategy. So that is based on industry and based on who you are connecting with and engaging with. With most of us in the first touch of your pitch, clarity and brevity are valued, right? If you think of like Chris described, giving a report or a debriefing, right? Clarity and brevity are critical. So using that lens, but then overlaying the corporate culture, right? So maybe less formal, but still clear and to the point. Decision-making within this structure, a corporate structure, is often collaborative. So there's not as often one single decision maker. It's several people reviewing an RFP and your submission to compete for a contract. So decisions will sometimes require cross-functional consensus, and it's helpful to understand the priorities of each decision maker. So if you can get to that, that can be really helpful in how you tailor your pitch. Feedback within a corporate setting may also be indirect. You may not get feedback on your RFP. One of my goals is that you do get feedback if you get to the point of RFP so that you can continue to hone and you understand what may not have been a fit. Silence when it comes to the relationship with a corporate entity does not necessarily mean rejection. Like I said, there's thousands, tens of thousands of vendors that are trying to reach out to citizens, and I may be the only door that they meet, right? The only entry point, right? So if I'm silent and I don't respond or I don't respond right away, it doesn't mean there's a rejection. It just means that there may be other priorities that are taking precedent over that response. So following up professionally and asking for feedback is really valuable, but not inundating. That can be helpful as you navigate kind of some of these hidden rules of corporate culture. And last, I've punctuated it and I've reiterated it, but fit goes beyond do you do the thing or provide the thing that we buy. Fit is on many points. So even just getting the feedback of what does fit look like for this opportunity or for this engagement can be really valuable. And it may be different, a different answer from supplier diversity versus sourcing versus the business line. What are the highest priorities in terms of fit? So how do you adapt, as I mentioned, to this shift into a corporate strategy, into a corporate mindset and navigate contracts? Being adaptable, right? We've just thrown a lot of information at you and a lot of kind of insight into through the lens through which you can look at how to navigate corporate contracts, especially from having a service background. Being adaptable, flexing that muscle, understanding there's differences in industry, there's differences in terms of who you're engaging with within the company. Building that flexibility or that adaptability muscle and being flexible is critical to your success. And also, if you do not win an opportunity or if you are not invited, no now does not mean no always, right? So being adaptable to the no and saying it's just not right now, it's just not yet, it's just not a fit. So keeping that in mind can be really valuable. Focusing on continuous learning, you as an individual, if you're a business leader, but also your company, what are the areas, that you can take away from this presentation to say, okay, I'm strong in this, but I really need to build that network. How do I do that? How do I identify or find a mentor? NaVOBA is probably a great place to start to find those resources, but continuing to develop your skills, continuing to develop your business to meet the evolving needs of the contract. Also, continuous learning within your area of expertise. If you bring a high level of knowledge of the changing environment affecting both corporate entities like Citizens within banking, but also maybe even affecting the supply chain that you're participating in, that can be a really important competitive edge. So focusing on continuously learning and continuously growing is really valuable in navigating. And then last, building that network, identifying a mentor, can be the difference between a successful pitch and an unsuccessful pitch, can be the difference between getting in the door or not getting in the door. Building relationships and seeking guidance. Whenever I've mentored businesses and business owners, I always ask, are you always asking for and open to feedback? Whether that be from me, if I'm the mentor, but also with anyone you have the opportunity to pitch to. With every RFP, are you soliciting feedback, taking that in as new information, and growing and changing as a business and as a business owner? Utilizing your network and utilizing mentors can be so important for that. And then really all of this over time builds confidence in how you pitch, builds confidence in your capabilities and how you communicate them, and your ability to navigate and adapt to new environments, both moving from a public sector to a private sector, but also navigating different potential customers, and relationships that you'll be building with those customers. Chris, do you have anything to add to this one?
Kind of one point I'd like to kind of bring out, both related to this slide and the previous one, is that reading the room, as Adriana has kind of highlighted, developing the adaptability and continually learning and listening and seeing and watching, as well as developing the mentors. I would be willing to bet a cup of coffee if I ever meet any of you folks in person that every unit you checked into, you immediately had a sense of the commander or the senior enlisted. What's the environment like? Who's who in this group? What's my time with this group going to be like? And that's the same thing when you meet up with citizens. It's or you're at a convention at one of those events. Is kind of reading the room, reading your audience, and knowing who you're engaging with, so that you can, to Adriana's point, kind of refocus your lens on how do I want to approach them? What is their background? What is their expertise? So that I know how to do the best I can to ensure my message resonates with them and they walk away with a positive experience with me, if you will. But the continuous learning, certainly, and also when I talk about, the innovation or niche, being really good at what you do and not trying to be all things to all people may seem somewhat counterintuitive, but getting an inroad in X, and then over time you build those skills to Y and Z, 1, 2, 3, etc., allows you to stay true to who you are and to just really hone your skill set, which then allows you to find mentors that are in that area and networking of, hey, here's what I'd like to do. Here's what I'm really proficient at. Do you know of folks that I could just reach out to find out how to make good better, if you will? And that just, I would offer, is an intellectual approach to continually looking for ways to succeed.
Absolutely. Thanks, Chris. And the last few key points here. So turning that service experience into business success, really leverage your greatest foundational strengths. Like Chris said, do the thing you do really well. Don't do everything. Businesses that do everything and become these large umbrella companies, and they procure, they acquire all these other companies. They are few that do that and do that very well. Do the thing you do and be the best at it, and then learn to tell that story of your foundational strengths that make you a strong partner. And also think of your own foundational skills that were developed and honed through your career, and your experience in service, and leverage those as best you can in a corporate setting, through some of the ways that we highlighted and some of the assets you've built. Understand the procurement process and that there are similarities, for example, within industry, through banking and financial services, the procurement process will be very similar. But it may be different in retail, and it may be different in higher education. It may be slightly different in healthcare. So focusing on a few key customers, understanding their procurement process. What are the databases they're using to find diverse vendors, or to identify vendors for their needs? What is their process? Getting strong and smart on a few of those rather than looking at this whole landscape of these potential customers. It can be really helpful to hone in, and then make profiles or get into some of those databases as we described earlier. Overcome some of these challenges we described, right? There's tools and tactics, there's resources both nationally, through NaVOBA, to navigate some of these challenges that you may be experiencing both as business owners and entrepreneurs, or even in that shift from public to private. But there's also local resources. Chris had mentioned one in, I think, Rhode Island that was fabulous. Identifying those local resources. There are people there are relationships, and there are resources to overcome some of the challenges you may face, and even just the fatigue in building new skills, and and dealing with some of these differences and changes in environment all at the same time. And lastly, utilize those resources. Utilize the resources, for example, like I mentioned, on the small business banking website of Citizens. There's great resources there from everything to, how do you start your business? How do you scale? How do you identify, when there's a need for capital to navigating taxes? Utilize your resources both in people, and in paper. And so that's people you meet, network, and online resources, or educational resources that you might find through places like Citizens or NaVOBA. Veteran-owned businesses really do have a strong foundation for skills and success in corporate contracting. It's really about identifying and leveraging them, to really stand out. And the last thing I'll share was this quote from Janine Fallon, who's a contributor to Forbes. And what we know as well at Citizens is veterans bring leadership, discipline, and adaptability forged in high-pressure environments, traits that directly translate to corporate success. Your challenge is bringing those to the surface, communicating them effectively, and finding the right inroads to then build the relationships to make that case. Because opportunities are out there for you to find and for us to find you. So thanks everybody for attending, and for your engagement. We're available for questions. And I think we might have had one in the Q&A.
Excellent. Yes, thank you all. And this has been a wealth of information. And it looks like, again, friendly reminder, everyone, the Q&A is open. And it looks like you all decided to message me directly with some of these questions. So no problem as well. One of our questions, see, going through chat. Is there any documentation suppliers should have prepared in advance to help with onboarding? And I would imagine that that would be commodity specific, but are there any baseline things that they can make sure they have prepared?
That's a great question. I think Chris, who's done more of the vendor onboarding, would have some great insight.
I'll use the standard military answer. It depends. The Once we work through a non-disclosure agreement, so we get to the point where we want to have the relationship with the company. And then a lot of it's administrative in terms of the banking information and setting up the contract vehicle. And then from there, really it's a matter of both parties working towards finalizing a master agreement and a statement of work, presuming that we're gonna and I say the master agreement's kind of like the marriage, and then the statement of work's like buying a house together. The one's a foundational, and the other one is we're actually going to do a thing, if you will. So the documentation, in the event you do have nearshore or offshore resources, having, I'll say, evidence of how you monitor that relationship and or from a security standpoint, because certainly with Citizens, as we're right now a US only company, we don't do business outside of the US, but we do have vendors that do have near and offshore resources. So there are some additional steps from a regulatory and security standpoint that we go through. So a lot of it, I would suspect, is kind of like in the military planning when you're going after, here's the mission. Okay, what are all the requirements I have in order to be successful on that mission? And some of those are key that we're gonna run into with you, but a lot of it just kind of depends on the nature of the situation.
One thing I'll add, and this might be oversimplifying, but we've seen this with especially some of our smaller vendors. Be prepared to read the contract. When we get a contract signed and turned around in a day, we know it wasn't read. And while from our legal standpoint, we say they had no objections to anything that was in this contract. Like, great. It doesn't necessarily speak to the business acumen that we are looking for in our partners. So be prepared to read the contract, have whether it's legal counsel or the internal capabilities, but read the contract, know what you're committing to. Because when it comes to that scope of work and checking in on performance throughout, it can be a big surprise to a vendor who didn't read something saying, I agreed to that. So that's a good preparation step.
That's a great point. Thank you for that reminder. And I'm sure it sounds simple, but clearly those things come up regularly. So we want to make sure we're mindful. Next question is, are real estate and facilities vendors sourced nationally or regionally?
Yeah, great question. So we have various RFPs where we have the capability or flexibility to work with vendors within a region. It may be a particular state or within a multi kind of contiguous state region, but that will be clarified if we are reaching out to you. Or if I already have a relationship with a vendor and, I know they work in Pennsylvania, but we need one in Pennsylvania, Maryland, and, two other surrounding states, I will then check and see what is your capability for certain areas. One of the strategies that I encourage sourcing people to use and encourage the business lines to use when it comes to property and real estate is asking the question, is there flexibility to go to a regional strategy versus a national strategy? And so sometimes there is and sometimes there isn't, and it really depends on the contract. And also the question can be, if you're working within a larger area or even nationally, the second question is, do you self-perform? And self-performance may be the differentiator. We may need that for a particular vendor or a particular opportunity, and sometimes it may not be the number one priority. So again, it does depend, but the answer is kind of both.
Excellent. So if you are operating regionally only at this time, that does not mean you are out of the running, which is great.
Right.
Next question. Um, are the IT infrastructure vendors typically engaged through enterprise-wide contracts or project-based sourcing?
Again, that's definitely both and. The business line is the one that determines what that need is. And that comes then from the business to sourcing to me. On the front end, I actually may not know that, right? Because it shifts based on every single need. I may just be looking for the vendor that can perform within the area that we're looking for, or that has strong capabilities in, for example, AI. That's my first level of qualification or vetting. And then the sourcing person may know, okay, we're really looking for, scope of work right now, or we're really looking for, that project based for this need. And so it is definitely a both and.
Perfect. And our last question, how do we connect through those opportunities that can connect internationally? And I did put in that capabilities link that we saw in the chat or throughout the presentation, and we'll be sure to include it in the recap. And when you're looking back at this YouTube as well, I hope everyone was able to write down supplier diversity at citizensbank.com to send your capability statement to if you indeed have an opportunity that's listed. And yes, Adriana has put it in the chat as well. So thank you.
What I put in the
Okay.
chat is actually the link to our small business banking website as well. But the email address to send your capability statement is supplierdiversity@citizensbank.com. That's citizens with an S, and supplier diversity does not have a period between. So feel free to send your capability statement. And also, check out our small business banking website for various resources and opportunities.
Jasmine
Excellent.
Timothy had looks like in Q&A, Timothy had dropped it kind of read, Timothy, if you're still on, it kind of read like a comment/question. So if by chance you're there and could reframe it. I kind of agree with what I think is the outcome, that lowest cost may not always be the desired outcome, but I'm not sure if I'm catching the question.
I see the question here. It says, how do we make the first connection to try to qualify? And I think, Timothy, you might have submitted that one in the Q&A, and I see it come through twice. The best answer is to submit your capabilities. Because we don't, to your capability statement to this email address, because we don't publish our opportunities, there's no place for you to go look to see what are we buying right now. Rather, you send your capability statement. I look to see, do we buy the thing that you offer? Do you have, whether it's the scale, the size, the scope, the niche, those various indicators of fit, and then I pass your capability statement and your business information along to somebody in Chris's seat. So again, the opportunities are not public. There's no list of them. It works a little differently that way in corporate than it does in government contracting, for example, at least for citizens. Other corporations may put out RFPs, and that's different company to company.
Clarify that. I hope that answers your question, Timothy.
I do see, can you send information for the format of the capability statement? And we'll just take this as our last question, but there isn't one format. NaVOBA actually probably has great resources on how to create your capability statement, how to make it look professional, what are the key components, whether it's your NICS codes, your key services. There's a lot of great resources on how to create your capability statement. Citizens doesn't have one format that we accept or look for. We really look for, are you effectively communicating what you provide and the value to citizens? And there's sort of key components. So there's definitely some great resources out there on that, and I'm sure NaVOBA is the right partner to start looking at that for.
Absolutely. Please use your resources. For the sake of time, we want to make sure we tell everyone thank you again for joining us. If you have any questions following this session, please reach out to us at vbe@navoba.org, or you can reach out at ca@navoba.org with any questions following the session. In the next few days, please expect a link to this recording so you can look back any notes that you might not have been able to get in real time. And then be on the lookout for our future events. We have a matchmaker coming up in March, so be sure to take a look at the NaVOBA events calendar and get registered if you have not already. Again, special thank you to Adriana and Chris. You guys provided a wealth of information. So if you have any questions, everyone, please feel welcome to reach out. Thank you all for your time.
Thanks, Jasmine. Thanks, everybody.
See you later.